Congress. The Education Department moved to cut nearly half of its workforce last week, and the order could make it nearly impossible for the remaining employees to execute their jobs. NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor is outside the Department of Education, and NBC News Chief Education correspondent Rahima Ellis joins us here in studio. But Yamiche, let's start with you on the ground out there. What else is the White House saying about this executive order?
Well, it's interesting and a bit confusing. President Trump has promised over and over again to eliminate the Department of Education, and this executive order is telling his education secretary, as you noted, to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education. But the White House is saying, even after this executive order, that they are actually going to continue to have functions that the Department of Education does, including doing things like facilitating student loans, as well as making sure that students that have disabilities or that are low income have what they need in terms of resources through Title I as well as through other grants. Take a listen to what the White House press secretary said when she was asked about this.
So the Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today. Pell Grants and student loans will still be run out of the department in Washington, D.C., but the great responsibility of educating our nation's students will return to the states.
So there you have it. She's saying that the Department of Education is going to be much smaller, but she's not saying it's going to be eliminated. That being said, we know that the Department of Education doesn't dictate curriculum, which is something that we've heard the president say. In fact, it's actually local school districts that do that. But I have to tell you, I've been talking to some protesters here outside the Department of Education. One college student told me she feels like public education is being threatened by this executive order, Zincle.
Yamiche, thanks so much. And you mentioned a lot of important things there, right? Student loans, curricula. So, Rahima, I want to ask you, because folks at home may go, wait, what does the Department of Education do? Don't I have a local school board? Walk us through what they do and don't do.
Yeah, it's confusing for a lot of people because the Federal Department of Education has this big, powerful sounding name. But when it was created 45 years ago, it was created to centralize information and to manage resources and funding and to provide information of best practices for schools. And so it is the smallest cabinet, one of the smallest cabinet level agencies within the Department of, within the federal government, and only 4% of its budget, of the federal government budget, goes to the Department of Education for spending. But within that, it's got a big budget of $268 billion, $1 trillion of it going to student loans. We've got money that goes to poor and disadvantaged students, money also for disabilities, for children with disabilities and special needs, and then there's also money for school improvements. But there is no money to write the curriculum, and that's the main thing that so many people think that the Department of Education does. It does not do that. It's a data collection, and even the president referred to the fact that the nation's report card recently came out and the scores were low, and that's one reason why the Department of Education should be dismantled. But the nation's report card is a snapshot, if you will, of how our children are doing in all of our schools across the state, and it is the DOE that does that data collection.
And this is not, of course, the only department that has faced threats from the White House. So, Yamiche, I want to end with you. I imagine the White House is preparing for a legal battle here.
That's right. We know at least that 21 Democratic attorney generals are suing to stop the elimination of the Department of Education. But we also know that the White House is pushing back and really is assembling in some ways a team of their own lawyers to push back on legal challenges here. Where that ends up is sort of anyone's guess, because, of course, Congress, again, has to be what needs to be done. And Congress has to go through with ending the Department of Education for it to actually happen. And, of course, we've also seen a lot of critics say that this is an administration that is sort of attacking the judiciary in a number of untoward ways. So definitely a place to continue to watch, Zincle.
Yeah, consequential moment for our schools, students, and teachers. Yamiche Alcindor, Rahima Ellis, thank you both. And as the fate of the Department of Education hangs in the balance at the federal level, right now there are huge separate protests in Colorado over proposed cuts to the state school budgets. Many educators say that students will pay the price for what they're calling unfair cuts. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky joins us now from those protests in Denver. Morgan, what are you seeing and hearing from those gathered out there today?
As Zincle, we're seeing and hearing a lot. This was thousands of educators across the state of Colorado that pledged to converge on the state capitol today to make sure their voices are heard. They're here for various reasons, but it all centers around funding. And I just want to give you a glimpse of how many people have shown up here. If Carrie can push over to the capitol, you'll get just a glimpse of the educators educators here. But Tim Clay, as it relates to the funding, last year the state pledged to no longer divert dollars away from Colorado schools. However, they're now this year in the face of a $1.2 billion budget shortfall, and a lot of uncertainty is certainly in the mix right now. That has brought educators out here. Another factor, in Clay, is how schools are funded. This is a new plan from the governor that educators say will shortchange a lot of smaller schools and communities. I want you to hear what one teacher had to say in particular about the fears of where things stand. Take a listen.
It's scary because it's coming from the state and from the federal, so we just don't feel like there's any solace. We're kind of in this pincer movement of like, where is this funding going to come from?
I think what we do today has national implications, and I hope that we come out and show a strong message that education matters, that teachers' voices matter, and that we are going to show up and stand up for kids.
Susan Clay, you hear those concerns on the state level. They say those are only compounded by the fact that they know what President Trump may say today in Washington regarding the Department of Education and its potential fate. And that is why there is an air of uncertainty that hangs heavy over the Colorado Capitol today. Susan Clay?
So, Morgan, demonstrators calling for change. What happens after today? Are there more protest plans? And have we heard from the state?
There are no protests, at least currently planned, in addition to this one. We do know that the governor has defended the stance he's taken as it relates to the state budget. It is not formalized. It's merely being proposed right now. And while he said that he will make sure that schools get valuable dollars that they need, there's certainly a somewhat of a level of disbelief on behalf of the educators here that have gathered on the steps of the state capitol. Clay?
Morgan Chesky in a lively Denver, Colorado. Thanks so much. Pressure is growing for authorities in California to release Eric and Lyle Menendez from prison. A rally led by the Menendez family was held today in Los Angeles. Last week, LA County's top prosecutor